Saturday the 25th of March, 2017, 6:15 p.m. Creamed chicken and flageolet bean bake. OK, so it wasn't a culinary masterpiece, given that most of it was made from tins lurking under cobwebs in the furthest reaches of the larder. But she deserved points for sheer inventiveness, and over the last hour, as night had fallen and the wind blew itself inside out, howling around the cabin with ever-increasing ferocity, their little home had filled with a tempting aroma of sage, dried, and mushrooms, freeze-dried. She'd found some peas in the freezer and managed to make a creamy mash topping with a tin of condensed milk and a couple of clod-crusted potatoes, tubers shooting out at all angles, from a sack that had been kicked to the back of the larder and long forgotten. "Mitch!" she called, her hands and arms swamped in the oven gloves patterned with red gingerbread men, as she lifted the steaming dish from the oven and set it down carefully on the iron trivet. "Dinner's ready!" Pulling off the gloves, she turned to the hob, the saucepan lid rattling as the water roiled and steam billowed in plumes underneath. She grabbed it and poured away the boiling water, blanching the peas immediately and setting down the pan again. Was he still on the phone? It had rung earlier when she'd been finishing the potatoes, and she'd heard the murmur of his voice through the closed door. It was Tuck, no doubt wanting to know why they hadn't made the dash into town during the storm's brief respite this afternoon, like they'd said they would. Little did he know, they'd only just got out of bed. Storm? What storm? Baby, it's cold outside. "Mitch, hurry up, I'm serving!" She bent down and pulled the dinner plates from the warming tray beneath the oven, wincing as she momentarily forgot about the silver rims around the edges and having to run her finger under the coal tap for a moment. She stood by the sink, looking out into the night, trying to see past this storm that seemed personally targeted, like a wolf trying to blow the house down. But the blackness was unremitting, and all she saw was her own image reflected back at her in the small square panes. Badger, knowing that if ever food was going to be dropped on the floor, it was now, was sitting in his usual spot by the bin, watching her intently, his head moving in time with her darting dashes from the oven to the sink and back to the hob again, like a spectator at a tennis match. "Mitch?" she tried again. No reply. Meg cast Badger a look. "Honestly, what's he doing? Go and get him, there's a good boy." Badger knitted his ginger eyebrows together in his black face, as though he couldn't imagine what was keeping Mitch either, and pattered across the kitchen. Meg reached for the wine glasses in the cupboard, and retrieved the Pinot Noir she'd left to warm and breathe by the stove, having found it frozen almost solid that morning by the door in the shed. She hoped it would be passable. She placed it on the small pine table, which she'd decided to cover with a tablecloth for once, and a small jug of holly branches dotted with berries snipped from the tree outside their bedroom window. Her view was that if they couldn't eat well, they should at least dine in style, and that meant dressing the table and using proper glasses. Their day in bed together had left her feeling more connected to her fiancé than she had in weeks. His recent agitations soothed away, and she was now feeling strangely sad that the storm would soon, inevitably break, and their little mountainside bubble would burst. She heard the front door slam, the wind propelling it with extra force, so that the entire cabin seemed to shake for a moment, and the curtains lifted in the draught like skirts. Running back to the open-plan kitchen area, at 60 square metres, the cabin really was too small for unnecessary walls. She heaped the peas onto warm plates and was spooning out the bake when Mitch appeared in the doorway, Badger jumping up and down excitedly the way he always did, when he knew he was going out too. Mitch didn't notice the dressed table or the steaming meal on plates in her hands. He was looking straight at her, apologetically, ruefully, but his brown eyes already had that brightness in them that always came when he was going out on one of his sorties. "Oh no," she gasped, dropping the plate clumsily on the worktop so that a few peas rolled like marbles over the side and down the front of the unit. But even Badger didn't notice. His entire focus was on his master, recognising the helmet in his hand and the harness already on over his waterproof trousers and parka, the small backpack on his shoulders, the length of rope coiled around his waist, his boots clipped shut, and his skis, no doubt already positioned outside the door with their skins on. He knew what it meant as well as she did. "Mitch, no, you're not going—"
"Meg, that was Tuck. They've got 2 guests missing, a father and his 12-year-old son. They went on a hike this afternoon, heading for Wilson's Gully."
His speech was low, but hurried, urgency bubbling through.
"What?" she half gasped, half shrieked. "Are they mad? Who would go out in these conditions? Don't they know there's a freaking lockdown?"
"I know, but apparently they set out thinking that the break in the weather this afternoon would hold."
"How could anyone with half a brain think that? Haven't they heard of the eye of a storm? Didn't they see the forecasts?"
As if to prove the point, the wind gusted strongly again, making the timbers groan. Meg almost felt the wind was trying to wrap itself around the cabin and lift it straight off the ground.
Mick shook his head. "I don't know. They're tourists. Who knows what the hell they were thinking? But I do know that I have to do something. These people have been officially missing now for 4 hours already. The wife says they would due back at 2 p.m. And in these conditions, in the dark, search and rescue won't look now until first light. Their last known position is too far on foot from town, and it's too treacherous to send out a team." He sighed, looking directly down at her. "They won't survive the night, Meg."
"But it can't be down to you to save them,"
Meg cried, watching in mounting panic as he put on his helmet and fastened the straps beneath his chin. He checked the head torch, a beam of dazzling, almost intergalactic white light dissecting the room in half. Satisfied, he turned it off again.
"Look, it's different setting out from here. I know the area better than anyone. The wife had a map of their route and where they were when she last spoke to them, and it was Wilson's. If they're still there, then they're just over the ridge from here. Even in these conditions, I can be with them in the hour."
"But what if they're not? What if they've moved on?"
she demanded. He glanced at her. Mitch didn't deal in what-ifs.
"Does search and rescue know you're going up there?"
she asked. But his silence was all the reply she needed. They both knew perfectly well they'd forbid him to go out.
"So, you're just going to go out, on your own, with no backup?"
"I'll have Badger with me. He's better than anyone."
Badger's ears lifted at the sound of his own name. His head cocked inquiringly to the side, his paw held out in front of him like an invitation to dance.
"No!"
Rushing past him into the hall, Meg pressed herself against the back of the door.
"You're not doing it. I won't let you."
"Meg?"
"I said no!" "No!"
She spread her arms wide so that they touched the walls. Mitch walked up to her, his boots clunky on the floor, his technical, waterproof, windproof, thermally insulated clothes rustling as he moved.
"Meg, there's a 12-year-old boy out there."
His voice was softer now.
"I can't just leave him out there all night. He'll be dead before dawn. Him and his father. There's no other way. I'm their only hope."
She swallowed. She didn't like the idea of a child being out in these conditions any more than him. But did that mean she had to offer up the man she loved, like a sacrifice to the gods?
"Look, I'll be fine. I'll take care, I promise. I'm not as crazy as you seem to think I am. Even I can see it's a bit breezy out there."
She blinked at him, furious for doing the right thing. Furious with herself. The snowmobile. That damned machine. If she had just let him repair it the other day, he could have travelled on that. The climb to Wilson's Gully was steep, but on the snowmobile he would have saved precious time, getting to these hikers sooner, coming back to her sooner. How long will it take? They both knew perfectly well how long it took to hike to Wilson's Gully. As the crow flew, It was 1.5 kilometres from here. But the gradient was merciless, and even in the summer, when they picnicked there with Badger, it was a 40-minute exercise. But in these conditions, with this visibility? They both knew what she was really asking was, what time should I start to worry? Give me 5 hours.
5? But you said you could be there within the hour.
It'll be slow going. I'll need a good margin of time for rests and orientation both ways. And I don't want you worrying unnecessarily. If I'm not back by... He glanced at his watch. 11:30, or you haven't heard from me, then you can raise the alarm in town. He cupped her face in his warm hands and kissed her sweetly on the lips, her hands holding onto his elbows, trying to keep him there with her in this moment. But he pulled away, resolute. She couldn't entice him this time. There was a man and his child running out of time on the mountain, and no one was coming to look for them. No one but Mitch. I love you, he murmured.
I love you,
she replied fiercely, kissing him again. Gently, he released her grip on his shoulders, reaching down to pat Badger, who was sitting patiently and looking up at him beseechingly. Ready, fella? He asked, ruffling the dog's head. Mitch opened the door just as a gust rushed at them, blowing Meg's hair clean off her neck and lifting the corners of the rug. Snow that had been blown onto the porch spilled in, great froths skimmed off the surface like the steamed milk on a latte, skittering a haphazard path into the cabin. Meg gasped from the shock of it. -3 temperatures with a wind chill factor of -20 was not something you could ever adapt to, not even if you had lived in it your whole life. Mitch bounded down the porch steps and unlocked the walking hinges in his boots, switching his bindings into tour mode before clipping into the skis. Meg closed her eyes at the sound of it, knowing he was unstoppable now. One small push, and he'd be gliding away from her, faster than she could catch, heavier than she could slow. Badger was turning circles in the snow excitedly, his tail aloft, nose to the ground, trying to track a scent, the way he always did. Except it wasn't squirrels they'd be looking for tonight. The carabiners jangled against each other on his harness, and she tried not to whimper as he switched on the head torch, and the full brute force of the storm's strength was laid bare in that single strobe of light. Trees were almost bent double beneath the wind's power, the air thick and dense, like sifted flour, as falling snow mixed with whipped-up snow so that flakes seemed to be defying gravity, whirling up, down and sideways. Mitch secured the pole straps around his wrists and looked back at her, careful not to blind her with the light of his torch. 5 hours, he said, and then, stabbing his poles into the snow, he pushed off, gliding away into the black. Badger raced ahead, his joyous bark echoing like a gunshot in the crystalline night, fading too soon. She stared into the silence, straining to hear anything that would tell her she wasn't alone. But the night had claimed them. They were gone.